Hey, Chargers fans, welcome into another episode of the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven. I'm your host. Joining me as always are Tyler and Alex. Tyler, how you doing today, man?
Doing well. Can't wait to talk about players the Chargers will not draft.
Yeah, it's gonna be a fun episode today. Alex, how are you doing today?
Doing good today. It seems that our Twitter account has escalated into a quote tweet war with me and Steven regarding Surtain and Horn, who they'll probably not end up drafting anyway, and they'll probably take a wide receiver. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, Telesco. Honestly, like all we can do right now is make educated guesses, and
Yeah.
Tom Telesco is gonna throw all of us off like he always does.
Jalen Waddle.
It's a smart tactic by you guys, though, because if you have a really bad draft take, we'll just blame Alex. Like, it was he posted. Don't worry about it. Yeah. No. It wasn't us.
Yeah, it wasn't us. It wasn't us. So yeah, obviously a lot of fun today talking about the cornerbacks. But today we are going to discuss the quarterbacks, like Tyler said, the players that the Chargers will not be drafting. So we wanted to get this out of the way, have some fun with it as well, and throw in a Justin Herbert comparison as well, and have that conversation. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun. So first and foremost, we are going to get to an interview with Michael Peterson, who covers the Chargers for SB Nation. Has done some great work and actually just put out a profile today on JC Horn. So make sure and go give that a read, and we'll get to that interview right now. Give it a listen. All right. So thanks again to Michael Peterson for joining the show. I thought we had a really good conversation. Something that I kind of wanted to touch on more, and I wish we could have with him, was his little article that he did about Tom Telesco's draft, develop, and re-sign method and philosophy that hasn't really been working out too well for him recently. But we'll have to give that a discussion another time. Alex, any other thoughts that you had from that conversation with Michael Peterson?
Yeah, I mean, it was just an interesting interview to talk about, obviously the prospects and sort of how he views them. And I also just liked it in terms of getting a view on sort of like where the Chargers are. And, you talk about that draft, develop, and re-sign method and how that kind of failed with Hunter Henry, if it did. And, what the alternate history is if they get an extension done last year, if the pandemic doesn't happen, and if the cap doesn't drop. I just think that part of it is interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of, what ifs in that scenario. And there's a lot of what ifs in this scenario that we're going to be talking about, which is the quarterbacks today. I think it's a really interesting conversation. And I did watch some Zach Wilson film in preparation for today, which not going to lie, it was not fun for me. For those who don't know, I did go to the University of Utah and we do not like the BYU Cougars at all. So, but I did try to be as objective as possible in watching Wilson. So, we'll get it started with this conversation because I think the number one quarterback, for the consensus is going to be Trevor Lawrence. And that's kind of been the case really for the last couple of years. He's had this position on lockdown for really since he was a senior in high school. So the interesting conversation as it relates to the Chargers is how that compares to Justin Herbert, right? And where Justin Herbert would go if he were in this class or if Trevor Lawrence were in last year's class and vice versa. Tyler, we'll start with you on this one. Where do you land on how Justin Herbert would have compared to Trevor Lawrence as a prospect? And maybe, how blurry is that line because we've seen Justin Herbert become a much better pro than we will thought he was as a prospect.
It's funny. It's like Justin Herbert in the NFL kind of plays like Trevor Lawrence did or has in college. Not obviously different talents, if you will. Justin Herbert just had nothing like what Trevor Lawrence was able to do at Clemson. And we weren't able to see what Herbert could become until he got to the NFL. So it would have been very hard to evaluate them. But okay, this is going to be a tough one because I know Chargers fans are like, oh, okay, I would take tomorrow I'm taking Justin Herbert over Trevor Lawrence,
right?
Knowing what I know now. But even then, it was tough at first for Justin Herbert. I have to be real, and I had to remember kind of how this started for Justin Herbert. The first game against Kansas City wasn't very good, guys. They had good moments for a rookie. Good. Also, many high throws. I think he was sacked twice for minus 14 or 15 yards. He had that awful interception. He goes there the next week against Carolina. Some bad throws, interception. Probably should have been a pick six. He's supposed to do a 3-step drop, ends up doing like a 5 or 7-step drop. the guy gets around Balaga and he sacks him for a fumble or whatever it was. It was tough. Whereas I think, but eventually he got those things figured out, right? Of course, we saw how the rest of the season played out. Granted, there were some stumbles against the AFC East, but eventually those things got ironed out.
Right.
Trevor Lawrence, I don't think is making those mistakes early on here when he gets to the NFL. What surprised me the most about Lawrence, which Herbert does now, that I didn't think Herbert did as much when I watched him the first time. I was surprised to see so many excellent off-script throws. His arm talent to make these quick twitch throws rolling out to the boundary is so impressive. I actually checked the speed of which I was watching these clips, not the clips, the whole all 22, to see if I was watching it at like 1.25 speed. I heard this kid wasn't much of a runner, but he's got plenty of good runs throughout. So I don't know. Watching Lawrence in college is like watching Herbert kind of now, but we didn't get to see Herbert now then. So it's so interesting to try to weigh these two guys against each other. So either way, to answer your question, long story short, I would definitely take Lawrence as a prospect over Herbert. I don't think that's even a question. He's so much more refined. Like you said, he's been groomed to be the number one pick, and he looks like it for years. You can tell this guy has seen a few quarterbacks coaches and has some of the best people in the business helping him out, because everything he does, aside from some inconsistencies against pressure, I'll let you guys talk about that, but Herbert wasn't like that, but Herbert eventually became that. But still, I would take Lawrence. Then I would take Herbert in a draft. Today, I'm taking Herbert over Lawrence in the NFL.
So I think if you did a draft a year ago, Lawrence would be the number one pick. Just going back in time, it would be Lawrence, then Burrow, then Tua, then Herbert, right? If we did that a year ago. I think if you did it now, it probably would still be Lawrence. If we were doing last year's draft kind of thing, probably Lawrence, then Herbert, then Burrow, then Tua, I guess.
Yeah.
I think my thing with Lawrence is like there isn't a, people try to make comparisons to him, like where it's like, oh, it's Andrew Luck, or it's, some people have compared him to like Deshaun Watson. And I'm like, I don't think he's like that similar to any prospect. Like, his prospect type is very much the Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck, where it's like, this is a slam dunk and it can't be a miss. But I don't think there's actually someone that compares in terms of, like Tyler said, how he's able to make those off-balance throws, his actual arm, his accuracy. Like, I don't think there's been one before that is this good. Oh God, I'm gonna get dislikes. If you made me pick over the next 10 years, I'd probably take Lawrence over Herbert. It wouldn't be by a lot. But I just think that there's so much this guy can do. And like, I think there's going to be a very quick ascension to the level that, Mahomes is at right now, which is, QB1. I think he's going to be top 5 in this league very quickly.
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation when you bring up Herbert and who he is now, right? Because, we just saw this amazing rookie season where he set all these records. Couple of them will probably fall to Trevor Lawrence this year if he gets enough pass attempts with Urban Meyer. But, it is a really interesting conversation because a lot of people, they'll look at Trevor Lawrence, who's also basically 6'6". I think he's like 6'5 3/4 or whatever. And Justin Herbert is 6'6". But Justin Herbert is 240 pounds and Trevor Lawrence weighed like 218, I think, at his pro day. And so it's a little different of a conversation because they are different, but they are similar. They're both really big. They're both, have really strong arms. They're both mobile. I would have been interested to see what Lawrence ran in the 40. I probably would have assumed probably close to the same thing, maybe like a 4.6, 4.5 kind of thing. But when you look back at Trevor Lawrence's career and Justin Herbert's career in terms of college, right? Like the coaching there matters. And, Justin Herbert had 4 different offensive coordinators, and he didn't participate in like the Elite 11 stuff. He always stayed in Oregon. He always stayed, for his high school baseball season and things like that. And Trevor Lawrence was always at all the Elite 11 camps, and so was Justin Fields. And then he gets into college and he's working with Jordan Palmer all summer long. And Justin Herbert's just in Eugene, just like hanging out. And so, that's something that Daniel Popper mentioned in his article is like Justin Herbert had to be told by his quarterbacks coach John Beck that you're a special player. Like this arm you have is amazing. And so, I just feel like the upbringing is so different between the two.
Mhm.
I think if you're talking as purely as prospects, like if you're taking out the 2020 rookie season for Justin Herbert, I think it's Trevor Lawrence, and I don't think it's particularly
No.
close. Like as
Mhm.
much as people want to have this conversation, I love Justin Herbert and what he's been doing,
Sure.
but the offense in Oregon and the coaching and his decision making process and his performance under pressure, it's not a comparison to what Trevor Lawrence is. Who, if you want to get nitpicky about Trevor Lawrence, you can do that.
Mhm.
To me, he's got a 7.58 grade for me, which is, pretty close to number one overall in the class. So I think Trevor Lawrence is going to be a slam dunk. The only thing, Alex mentioned Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck. The only thing to me that's going to keep Trevor Lawrence out of being an elite quarterback is health. That's the only thing I see where, if we look, down the road in 6-7 years, if he's not a top 5 quarterback, it's going to be because he got hurt, not because he didn't have the talent.
Yeah, that and where he goes, and we know where he's going.
Yeah.
But, I'm not accusing Chris Sims of doing this, but you can kind of, if you wanted to be smart and take a gamble on this and make lists like he does. I hated his corner list, by the way.
Oh, his corner list was so bad.
So bad. Whatever. You could rank your guys based on kind of where you think they're going to go, because there's a chance Fields and Wilson, who are not a Trevor Lawrence, go to better situations if either of them, say, end up with Kyle Shanahan versus Lawrence going to the Jaguars. Like, the Chargers, while they did not have the head coach and they certainly did not have the offensive plan, like the Bengals did, to make Burrow succeed, they had the best kind of offensive team around him to let Herbert succeed. So even though I thought Tua was a better prospect, the Dolphins on offense were a mess, whether that be the talent that they had or the coaching staff that they had to produce an offense. It was rough. Herbert, while it wasn't that great, at least came into a good situation in terms of the team and the people around him. So I'm just worried to see. I mean, it's the Jaguars, guys. Like, I don't know how this is going to turn out. So we'll see, I guess. I don't think Alex is much of an Urban Meyer fan, so I don't think he believes that this will work out all that much. But special prospect, horrible situation, perhaps.
Yeah, I was just I'm sidetracked because I'm Googling what Chris Sims' quarterback list was, because now I'm curious about it. I see that he is Caleb Farley #1, but I haven't seen the rest of it. So I'll do a thorough Google on that. I think Trevor Lawrence will be successful in Jacksonville. I mean, Urban Meyer or not, I just think his ability supersedes any coach. And if there's one thing Urban Meyer is known for, I mean, it's having prolific offenses built around a college star. And that's what Trevor Lawrence is. So I think he'll be, great at doing that. For me, it's like Steven said, Jacksonville's offensive line, I think that needs some work and refinement. They did get Norwell back, but I don't know. I'm not sold on that as a protection unit, but he does have some weapons, at least more than he had, more than Jacksonville had.
He's got more than Tua has, man.
Yeah, more than Tua has at the moment, right? And Jacksonville could always go offense. I don't know, in the second, third round, maybe they get another wide receiver or something like that. But yeah, no, I mean, I think Trevor Lawrence is just going to be a stud, regardless of what team drafts him, even though we know it's going to be Jacksonville. It's just too much. Like, he has everything that you want in a quarterback. I think it's better than any prospect there's ever been before. And to me, that's not even overhyping him. That's just who he is, right? Andrew Luck, played at kind of a different time. Peyton Manning played at a different time. For this era of football, I think Trevor Lawrence is the greatest prospect we've ever seen.
I would agree with that as well. And I think he's going to be able to overcome, what kind of deficiencies Urban Meyer might have in terms of building his roster.
Right.
He's already complaining about free agency. And it's like, did you not know what you were getting into, my man? Anyways, but Andrew Luck was able to overcome, for the most part, for the early part of his career, a terrible offensive line and a subpar supporting cast. So I think Trevor Lawrence is going to be a successful quarterback. I think, it just kind of depends on what he does at the team level. And that's more of the coaching thing, because, Andrew Luck, he overcame things and he got them into the playoffs. But once it comes up to the point where you have to face, you know, a potential dynasty New England Patriot team, like that's when the other stuff, the other players around him will matter. But I think Trevor Lawrence is going to be plenty successful. You mentioned the Jaguars. I'm just going to mention this. I was doing an article today for Bolt Beat about, you know, why the Chargers, you know, have to take an offensive lineman. And don't be surprised if the Jaguars take one, either with their second first round pick or their first second round pick, because their right tackle situation is not very good. You know, they have Cam Robinson at left tackle. He's fine. But their right tackle is off. So I just wanted to bring that up. Don't be surprised if the Jaguars take an offensive tackle. But let's get to the other quarterbacks now. You know, I'm not going to lie, you know, Zach Wilson, as much as I try to be objective, I could not place him over Justin Fields. I think Justin Fields is number 2 for me by a wide margin. Tyler, where do you land on the number 2, number 3 debate right now?
Same thing. I don't want to say it's like last year, but in the same realm of me having Burrow and Tua and then Herbert. Take that with a grain of salt, because obviously Herbert ended up better. But I still think it's Lawrence and Fields. Fields a little bit lower than Lawrence, sure, but I still think those two are definitely the top 2. And then you can start talking about Wilson. I think Fields would have been the best quarterback prospect from the 2020 draft as well, for a different number of reasons. Maybe because he has more years than Burrow, or doesn't have the significant injury, you know, like Tua, or he actually was able to show something in like an NFL style offense, you know, more than Herbert did. I think that the notion that he's a one read guy is a lot of horse shit.
Yes.
I didn't see Wilson reading defenses any more than Fields was asked to.
Right.
Not that neither of them did. It's just like one guy could, one guy, I don't know. It feels like analysts are finding some way to push this kid down, and it's not really sitting well with me for some reason. I mean, I'll say this. I never saw Zach Wilson carve up Clemson going toe to toe with Trevor Lawrence, you know, and,
Right.
and that game is full of processing from Fields. He's full of talent, faced tons of high level competition. I think he should be QB2 based on, you know, the film and future projection. So yeah, he's pretty much my clear cut number 2. And I don't think it's really that close either.
So where do I land on the Zach Wilson 2-3 debate? I have Zach Wilson number 4. So that would be an issue there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Fields is slam dunk, the number 2 in this class. For me, I have Trey Lance at 3, who we'll get to later. But yeah, like Tyler said, I think Fields is unfairly judged in terms of what he, you know, the limited sample size that the Big Ten had this year. Then people were like, what about the Indiana game? And like, yeah, he wasn't good in the Indiana game. Did you see the game where he threw 6 touchdowns against the best defense in the country? Like, you know, that stuff makes me go a little bit crazy. But yeah, I think Fields, I mean, it's funny because when they were coming out of high school, you know, Trevor Lawrence was 1A and Justin Fields was 1B, right? Like, I think I forget who it was. It might've been Roger Sherman or somebody on Twitter, but they actually posted like their scores were like 0.001 points different.
Yeah.
And that gap grew in college, but like these two have always been, you know, the talk of their respective classes. And, you know, I think Fields is going to be great in the NFL. I think the Jets should take him. I don't know what their Mormon obsession is, but, you know, to me, you just got to take Fields number 2 if you're the Jets. And I know Brentley Weissman and other guys have said the same thing. I just think he's too talented to pass up.
Well, you know, like there's one thing, you know, like Daniel Jeremiah having Zach Wilson at 2. I understand, because I know that he's not gonna put out the bullshit narratives that like, oh, he can't process, because like, to be honest, like even Trevor Lawrence has issues with processing. It just comes down to that's what these college offenses are running and coaching. Like 98% of the time they're making 1 read, maybe 2, and then they're throwing the ball. And that's just the reality of the position nowadays. So the narrative surrounding Justin Fields has always been, you know, just something that doesn't really sit well with me. And, you know, we won't get into why I think that's probably happening. But
I get you though.
I think Justin Fields is a fantastic player. I think he would be an awesome choice in New York. I think he'd be a great fit for what they want to do with the Shanahan system. And, you know, luckily for him, you know, I think there's another good landing spot, which is Atlanta, you know, which will have another, you know, Atlanta with another Shanahan influence. And so I think those will be a good spot for him. All right, let's get to the Zach Wilson thing because, here's my biggest thing, right? Because I watched him, when I was in Utah, he was at BYU as a freshman. And then, he happened to play as his sophomore season as well. And my biggest thing with Zach Wilson is this: he was awful against Power 5 competition as a freshman and a sophomore. He didn't get the chance to rectify that process, that outcome, because COVID ruined their schedule, right? They were supposed to play like 6 Power 5 teams. They ended up playing 0. And the only time that he played a legitimate defense was Coastal Carolina. And he was bad. He was really bad under pressure, and he threw an interception, and he's not very good in those situations, and he hasn't had the opportunity to make that the opposite case. Like we saw with Joe Burrow, right? Joe Burrow was not very good in these kind of situations, and then he came out and had, arguably the best college football season of all time. And so even Justin Herbert, like, you see this progress in certain things. We just haven't seen that with Zach Wilson. So he's got an incredible arm, like the arm talent and the way that he can make throws off platform is insane. But the ability to make throws under pressure and the ability to make throws against elite competition matter to me. Like, I know a lot of scouts were like, level of competition doesn't matter. But what happened with Zach Wilson and BYU is he essentially transferred to a lower level of competition. And so those things matter to me. And that's why Wilson is actually 4 for me as well. I do have Lance at 3, but those are my issues with Zach Wilson, and it's not really his fault because COVID kind of threw his season for shit.
So yeah, I'm gonna get to my take on Zach Wilson, but I will announce that the Chargers have signed Kyler Fackrell from the Giants. That's per their Twitter. Interesting. Outside linebacker. We have news to talk about after this quarterback segment.
Interesting.
Breaking news.
But yeah, breaking news on the show. Zach Wilson. So the thing for me is when I watch him, like, I sort of see what people are talking about with like the whole like, oh, he could do the improv Mahomes stuff. Like, I sort of see what that is, but also he's playing at BYU, where their whole schedule was like, hey, we need to schedule a really hard opponent. Let's go get Coastal Carolina. That was their situation this year. So I see what people are talking about, and Matt Miller has compared him to Kyler Murray, which I don't necessarily agree with either, because Kyler Murray, I've seen video of him running stride for stride with Andy Isabella, who ran a 4.31. Like, Kyler Murray didn't run the 40, but if he did, he would have ran a 4.4 or higher. Like, he's an insane athlete who got drafted top 10 in 2 major American sports.
Kyler Murray ran for 1,000 yards at Oklahoma, man.
Yeah, that too. Like, he is just a beast. And like, I haven't seen anything that's like, is Zach Wilson's arm as good as Kyler Murray's? I don't think so. Is Zach Wilson's legs as good as Kyler Murray's? No, because if I put a 40-yard dash with Zach Wilson and Kyler Murray would dust him by probably half a second.
Probably
that's
more,
to
honestly.
me probably more. Like, it's a big difference between those two guys, in my opinion, in terms of athleticism. And you talk about Mahomes, it's like, okay, sure, he can do some of those Mahomes improvisation things, but Mahomes can also, from his own 20-yard line, throw the ball blindfolded, 70 yards out of the stadium. And
or when he's on a vertical plane in the Super Bowl.
Yeah. Or he's on a vertical plane in the Super Bowl, and the Bucs are eating him alive.
Or horizontal, rather, excuse me.
Yeah. And so for me, I put this comp up on the Twitter account, but for me, my comp is kind of Johnny Manziel, where, and I before people get on me about this, I don't mean that as like a bad thing. Like, Johnny Manziel was really good. And, look, Zach Wilson is a Mormon, so I don't think he's going to have any of the off the field issues Johnny Manziel did. But like, when I see him, I see like above average athleticism for sure. Yeah. But to me, I don't see that superstar athleticism that a lot of people have him, where he's just vaulting up the draft to be, number 2. When if you asked anyone last year, it would have been like, he would probably be like the 4th quarterback taken off the board. Right. So that's kind of my confusion with him. So I think he can be good in the NFL, like, just like I think Johnny Manziel could have been good in the NFL if he wasn't drafted into such a bad situation and had the issues he had. I just don't think he's at that point where I see his athleticism and traits, and I'm willing to overlook all of the, competition issues and all that.
This is a tough one. I don't want to smack him with the same issues not issues, what I did last year to Justin Herbert, I guess. Even though Herbert, I would have taken him as my third quarterback. I don't want to smack him for too much for not showing me something where it wasn't quite his fault. But look, I don't have a lot of time to watch a lot of games. This isn't our full-time job, despite what some people in the comment section believe. We don't do this for a full-time living. So I try to watch your best competition. If I'm watching Fields, I'm watching Clemson and Alabama and Northwestern, or all these ranked teams. And so with Wilson, you have to go back to 2019 and watch some of these games. And he had 2 passing touchdowns against 3 ranked teams. Like, that's really not good. That's not good. Again, I can't just judge him off of that because he also had a really good 2020 season based on what he did against teams. If they were all blank helmets, like, wow, he's really good. So, but I have to take both into account. So he actually has a second round grade for me. He's my quarterback 3, barely. I kind of agree with you guys where I don't see this elite athleticism that everybody keeps talking about. Like, I get it. He's athletic, definitely above average, certainly more than above average, but certainly not elite athleticism that people are seeming to talk about. But yeah, he has a second round grade for me. I would but that's kind of not fair again, though, because it's like I would, based on his 2020 tape, give him a first round grade. But I watched 3 games in 2019, and that goes into my grade too.
Yeah.
You have to include some of that, right? So he does have a second round grade for me. It's fine if he goes in the first round. I totally get it. He's an ascending player. Good job for, I was watching Peyton Turner play BYU because I wanted to watch Peyton Turner at Houston. And Wilson had a great game, right?
Yeah.
And Turner's no slouch as an edge rusher. He might go in the second round. But yeah, this is a tough evaluation. During the next couple months or so, we're going to talk about some tough evals. And this is one of them because it's just, you don't want to knock him too much because he had such a great year. But then, oh boy, it was really bad against good teams. And then he plays Coastal Carolina, and that wasn't good either.
Yeah.
So this is definitely a tough one for me. I don't want to have my words, I don't know. I don't want to get bit in the ass in about a year when he goes to a really good team and someone really capitalizes on what he can do well. But I just think ranking him quarterback 2 after watching him throw 2 touchdown passes versus Utah, USC, and Washington. Like, I can't do that. I really can't.
Yeah, it's
the best.
tough...
I just want to say the best part of watching Zach Wilson tape is the offensive line of BYU.
It's so good.
Like,
so
those
good.
those people are so mean. They will throw you. Like, it's just insane to watch. I just had to get that in there.
Yeah.
Watching him today and yesterday, I realized that, I might have to, reevaluate Brady Christensen, who is their left tackle. And I'll have to get to that point because, I think, the more it becomes likely that the Chargers pass on an offensive lineman in the first round, I think Brady Christensen in the second round could make a lot of sense. But, Wilson, like, the things that I've always known about him, is that he's got a really, really talented arm. And, I just think that, like, everybody, he's kind of getting like the Sean McVay effect in terms of like Patrick Mahomes. Cause like people are looking for the next Patrick Mahomes. And so they look at Zach Wilson and they're like, oh, like he does some of the same stuff that Patrick Mahomes does, but Trevor Lawrence can do some of that same stuff, and so can Justin Fields. And it's like, you don't hear that about them. You only hear it about Zach Wilson. So I think in any other year, right, in any other draft, he probably could have a legitimate argument for being the first quarterback taken and potentially the first overall pick. But you're going up against Lawrence and Fields, man. I think those two are the powerhouses. And I think, me personally, like if I were the Jets and if I were a Jets fan, I would be clamoring for Justin Fields because I think he's more of a sure thing. Like, I know what I'm getting in Justin Fields. I know what he can do against elite high-end competition, which whoever plays quarterback there is going to have to do because the Patriots defense is going to be really freaking good. Dolphins defense, really freaking good. And the Bills defense, really freaking good. So whoever they take at quarterback is going to have to be able to step up against high-end competition on a yearly basis. And I know with 100% certainty that Justin Fields can do that. And I don't know if Zach Wilson can. So it's a little unfair to him, like Tyler was saying, and I think he's going to be a successful quarterback. He's very talented.
Mhm.
If he lands in a Shanahan system, that's going to be great for him because that
Yeah.
offense makes things so much easier for quarterbacks. I just think Justin Fields would be the more sure thing. And I do think Wilson and Trey Lance are very close.
Yeah, me too.
Same. I have Trey Lance personally as my number 3. I think it's close with Fields, but for me, I just see some of the physical traits that really pop on tape, and people talk about those with Zach Wilson. I'm like, Trey Lance is 6'4", 230 pounds, kind of bowling people over, and it's just crazy. It's crazy to watch that. And the person that he reminds me of in his prime is kind of like Kaepernick. Like,
That's a great comparison.
and you could say like Kaepernick, 2015, 2016, that's when things went bad. But like when Kaepernick was, in his prime, 2012 to 2014, like I think that dude was the top 10 quarterback in the league. Like, and I just see that with him. Now there are things he has to fix. I know Dan Orlovsky was on ESPN talking about how he sort of has like a stance issue and mechanics that are sort of reminiscent of Mitchell Trubisky a little bit, which is a little scary. But I think if you can coach those things out of him, and if he lands in a spot like Atlanta, I think they absolutely can with Arthur Smith. If he lands in a spot like Carolina, I think he can absolutely. Matt Rule, to me, is a great coach. So I think if he lands in one of those two spots, he'll be set up pretty well. I think it's close. Because the level of competition at BYU and NDSU is, BYU is probably better, but the level of competitions aren't too much different at that point. So I would personally rank Lance higher based on the fact that when we talk about like those physical traits, I think that's kind of what separates him. I do think he needs to be more accurate, obviously, when he gets into the league. But for me, I just see those traits and I'm like, I have the reaction to Trey Lance that a lot of people have to Zach Wilson, to be honest.
I loved watching Lance, man. And, I watched him a few times now because I watched their film to watch Dylan Radunes, and then I watched their film to watch him. And Lance is a really, really strong football player, right? Like he's got a really good arm. His touch, the way that he's able to drop the balls in a bucket is very reminiscent of Russell Wilson. We don't see a whole lot of that out of other players. And the guy rushed for 1,000 yards in a college football season. Like, it's just crazy. And what you could potentially do with him. I think if he lands in, like Alex was saying, with Arthur Smith, who obviously they have Matt Ryan, so Trey Lance could sit for a year. Because if there is one quarterback that needs to sit for a year, it's Trey Lance, because we obviously haven't seen that development. And one of the bigger what ifs of the draft is like, what if that FCS school was able to play a full season, right? And we saw Lance do another like crazy 28 touchdowns, 1 or 2 interceptions, another 1,000 yards rushing. Like, how high could he climb? And he's still probably going to be a top 5 pick, and Atlanta apparently has, a hard on for him because I think that's a really good spot for him. But Lance is an interesting one. I do think him and Wilson are close, though. In terms of the 5th quarterback, I really wanted it to be someone else. But it's Mac Jones, man. He's just, first of all, him running a 4.68, bullshit. Not happening. No chance did Mac Jones run a 4.68. That is such bullshit. And like he's just really underwhelming. Like athletically, he's kind of similar to like an Eli Manning. Like just kind of doesn't have a great arm, doesn't wow you with any athletic traits. But he's really smart. He makes good reads, and his ball placement is generally outstanding. Does he get aided by having Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith? Sure. So did Tua, but people seem to have forgotten that already, aka Colin Cowherd. But I think he's a very solid quarterback prospect. I would not take him in the top 15. I think that would be a huge mistake, just with the way that the quarterback position is trending. Like, you need to be an athlete. But I think he's okay. Like, I look at Mac Jones in a very similar way that I looked at Jake Fromm. Like, he's not going to be a crazy good player. He's probably never going to be like an MVP type of player, but he'll get the job done. And he's, probably similar to like a Kirk Cousins or a Jared Goff kind of situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best spot for him is like any place where there's like a really good offensive line. And one of the places that I see as I look down the board, it's like, New England's there at
Yeah.
15. That spot to me would be great for him. And, you could have Cam as kind of his mentor, to some degree for a year. I think that would be a great landing spot, and you could have him kind of sit behind Cam in that situation. The athleticism is a problem, because I think if he was coming out 10 years ago, like we we
Mhm.
might be talking about him in the same way that we were talking about Matthew Stafford. Like
Yeah.
but now yeah, right, like you said, I think there's just so many more things that you need to do, whether, it's rushing the ball or evading pressure, that I don't know is going to be Mac Jones's strength. I do think the arm talent is there, not quite to the extent of like Lawrence or Fields, obviously, but I do think he has that. For me, my comp for him was kind of like Alex Smith, Ben Roethlisberger. Like that's kind of what I see when I watch him, where it's like, okay, he can do the things he needs to do, right? And you look at Alex Smith, who all those years ago was the number one pick, right? So that's kind of where I think a lot of people see him, but it's just a different game completely than what it was 15 years ago. And I think that's kind of the trick. We talk about how Zach Wilson is tough to evaluate. I think that's tough to evaluate with Mac Jones as well, because right, like if you do put a great offensive line around him, and if you do put the supporting cast around him, like he can really develop into something special. But the chances of doing that versus your percentage chance of doing that with Fields or Wilson or Lawrence, I just don't think they're as high.
Yeah, like you said, Jones is a good quarterback who's like Fromm, who just he's in the wrong body, unfortunately. Everything above the shoulders, I think, is solid. And Sarkisian asked him to run quite a bit. And you watched the national championship game. Not that he was able to do a lot, but he was able to efficiently run the offense. That was throwing a lot at Ohio State. I don't want to say he's a game manager, but that's also not like a bad thing to be called.
Yeah.
He just doesn't have like that ceiling, like you guys said, which is okay for some teams. It's just kind of like he is probably the fifth quarterback in this draft. Like that's where I have him. I think that's where you guys seem to have him.
Mhm.
And I'm sure that's like where pretty much everybody has Mac Jones fifth. And like, are you trading up for Mac Jones? So you're sitting there and the Chargers are like, we really want to trade back. Like, who's trading up for Mac Jones? I mean, like you said, the Patriots could sit there and take him. Like, I just don't know who's going to trade up for that guy. You could probably find 4, maybe 5 better prospects the following year. So, well, I'm just interested to see where he goes. I mean, Fromm, I liked a lot last year. He graded out really well because I like those, above the shoulders kind of quarterbacks. He fell to the 5th round. I don't think Jones is falling that far, but I'm really curious to see where he goes, because I thought someone taking Fromm in the 2nd would have been a steal, and he fell all the way back to day 3. So we'll see where he goes.
Yeah, that was wild. And he's in Buffalo, and it's like,
Yeah,
well, it's kind of a weird situation with Josh Allen and Jake Fromm because they're two completely different quarterbacks. And
totally.
So,
And they signed Biskey.
that's right. I forgot about that. Oh my gosh. But yeah, I don't know. Like, to me, if somebody's gonna trade up for Mac Jones, like I think it would be more likely that someone trades up to the Vikings, right? Because I don't think that the Patriots would trade up 2 spots to get Mac Jones, right? So if the Patriots are still sitting there at 15, and there's been talk that they've been maybe looking into trading up themselves to get a Justin Fields or a Trey Lance, which I think would be an outstanding situation for them, unfortunately. But to me, like it'd be more feasible to see like Washington trade from 19 to 14 with the Vikings. Like if the Patriots are sitting there at 15 and they know that, the Patriots are going to take Mac Jones, but like I'm not trading up for a player who doesn't have that kind of a ceiling. So it would be great for the Chargers if that were able to happen. But historically, we haven't really seen teams take a swing like that on someone like Mac Jones. Like we'll see it with someone like Jordan Love, who has really high end athletic traits. Granted, I think the Packers only traded up like 3 spots to get him. But I think the consensus around Mac Jones is that he's going to be, a game manager. He's going to need help around him. And that's just not someone that you trade up for. So it'd be great for the Chargers. I just don't think it'll happen.
And I'd rather trade whatever you think you'd have to give up to trade up for Jones. I'd rather just trade kind of the same amount for Teddy Bridgewater, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point. If you view Jones as a game manager, then what's the difference between him and trading for Kirk Cousins or Teddy Bridgewater? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if there is one. I mean, the advantage is he's younger on a rookie deal, right? And you can take advantage of that while you can. I just don't know if in 10 years, like, is he going to be your franchise guy? I mean, maybe he is, and maybe a team like New England or someone does everything perfectly around him to the point where, it really boosts him. I just, like 20 years ago, maybe he's the number 2 quarterback in the draft, but now he's just not.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see if he does experience a fall like, Jake Fromm did. I don't think he's going to fall to the 5th round, but
No.
The Patriots clearly think that they have a roster ready to win. They're going after all these moves. And so I wouldn't be that surprised if they took, a Jalen Waddle or Devontae Smith if they're at 15, or gave Cam Newton another weapon, or took a cornerback because, they have Stephon Gilmore, who's potentially being traded, and they have JC Jackson, who's going to be really expensive next year. So I'm not so sure the Patriots would take a quarterback because, what is, Bill Belichick's 72 or something like that? Like, how many years does he have left, and does he really want to coach a rookie, or does he want to just ride with Cam and stack the deck around Cam and be able to get into the playoffs that way?
Remember when Bill Belichick to the Chargers was a thing for like a week?
On Peyton.
Oh man. So the other interesting thing here in terms of quarterbacks really is if the Chargers potentially add someone in the draft. We've talked about them adding a veteran backup, but it's also possible that they add, a rookie draft pick. None of us have done enough of that homework. But I think if I'm going to pick one, it probably would be Jamie Newman, just because at one point I felt like if he had gone to Georgia and taken enough steps in his development, I felt like he could have played himself into like a 1st round pick. So I think Jamie Newman would be like my choice in turn. Again, haven't watched, obviously he didn't have a season this past year because he opted out, but I think if the Chargers were to take a chance on a developmental guy, I think Jamie Newman in the 6th or 7th would probably be my choice. I don't know if you guys have anyone you want to bring up, but just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, taking a quarterback late in the draft sort of brings me to where the same problem that I have with Stick right now, which is like, if you're taking a 5th or 6th round pick quarterback, it's like, cool, but is that guy going to be able to back up Justin Herbert this year? The answer is probably no. And that's sort of my issue with Stick, who hasn't played football in like 2 years. So I wouldn't mind taking a shot on, I don't know, Jamie Newman, Sam Ehlinger, all these kind of guys that are in that, I don't know, 5th, 6th, 7th round pick range. But for me, it just brings you back to square one with Easton Stick, which is like, I haven't seen enough of this guy personally to make a decision on him to be the backup this year, which is why I want to bring in a Chase Daniel, or I haven't heard anything about Alex Smith. But that's kind of why I want to bring in those guys, just because
Right.
I haven't seen enough of Easton Stick, and the comments are going to be like, well, trusted Easton Stick. It's like, okay, but I can't trust him if I haven't seen him play football in 2 years. So like, you can talk about, I think Kellen Mond is going to go a lot higher than that. But
Yes.
for those 5th, 6th, 7th round guys, the issue for me is just, I don't see what the advantage is to having them over Stick at this point.
My top 5 is my only 5, and that's my input.
Yeah, I'm not planning on watching.
How far would Mac Jones fall?
Oh man. I think if he fell to like the 2nd round, I could see a team like Pittsburgh taking a shot on him in the 2nd round. I think the Steelers need to get, some kind of offensive lineman in the 1st round, but I could also see a team like the Colts taking him in the 2nd round as a backup for, they have Eason. That's kind of the same person.
Well, if you draft Mac Jones, you can make it so Carson Wentz doesn't play 70% of the snaps, and then you can get the Eagles out of that 2nd round pick.
True. That's an interesting question, because at that point, if you're Bill Belichick in the 2nd round, like, sure, you could probably take Mac Jones, but
I think the furthest he'll fall is probably late first round, within that 24 to 32 range, kind of. I sort of see a team maybe trading up for him at that point if they're early in the first round. I mean, kind of in a similar way to what the Chargers did last year. Actually, very similar to what the Packers did last year, just with a better quarterback, Jordan Love. So I could see a very sorry, Jason. But yeah, I think it's a very similar. I think it could be a similar thing if he does fall from that top 15 range. I think he'll be around like 25, 26 ish.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, that'll do it for our quarterback conversation. We're going to get into all the position breakdowns leading up to the draft. I cannot wait. This is my favorite time of the year. I love the draft as much as free agency has been fun. Talking about the draft is just so much fun. As for Kyler Fackrell, I think he's a special team signing. I haven't looked much into him, but we'll talk about that later on, unless either of you guys has something to talk about him right now.
I mean, the thing I'll say about Kyler Fackrell is I've seen him a lot because I watch NFC East football. And I really saw him a lot last year where the Giants kind of use him as like a rotational rusher. So I wouldn't be excited about him starting, but he did get 4 sacks last year, which is more than a lot of people in the Chargers defense had. If you're talking about depth pieces. 7 tackles for loss, about 23 total tackles. I read that wrong. 34 total tackles. I think he's decent enough to kind of be, I'll have to look more into the tape. I haven't watched a lot of him, but I do think he's good enough to be a rotational rusher that you can put on the other side of Joey Bosa, and just, since you're probably not going to be rotating Bosa out, honestly, you're probably rotating like if Edwosu needs a rest, or, if you do draft an edge in the 2nd or 3rd round and they need a rest, then I think Kyler Fackrell is playable, right? Versus they lost Rochelle and they lost a lot of those guys. I tend to think Kyler Fackrell is a little bit better than a Rochelle type, if that's kind of your backup option. I think he's decent enough to basically be a rotational rusher, and he can make some plays once in a while. And I think that's all you want. Obviously, special teams, huge benefit, just because, like, if you're going to lose some of the guys on special teams that they have in recent years, I think Fackrell's the guy who can contribute.
Was he good on special teams, or he's like Gabe Neighbors 2 penalty special teams?
He's a contributor. Like, I sort of see him as like a BJ Bello, right? Kind of what BJ Bello did last year. I don't think he's going to like pop on special teams the same way like Adrian Phillips made the Pro Bowl on.
Sure.
But I think he'll be decent enough.
Cool.
It's probably a similar signing to Nick Vigil, which is so funny because they were teammates in college. Yeah, Utah State, I think, right? I know Fackrell went there.
Yeah, Utah State.
There we go. So interesting depth signing that happened to break while we were recording this podcast. So all right, guys, that'll do it for us today. Thank you so much for tuning in. We do have a special treat for you next episode, so make sure and turn those notifications on, subscribe to the channel, and leave us a review if you can. And thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
I might go eat some chicken parm.
Boo.
Ooh.
Neighbors?